Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're looking at logical operators. It's basically how we handle multiple conditions, like saying, I want coffee and a croissant. Logical operators are special symbols used in programming to combine multiple conditions and evaluate them as a single. Logical operators help determine whether one or more conditions are true or false before a decision is made. For example, imagine variable A contains the value 0 and variable B contains the value 10. When PHP evaluates these values using a logical operator, it checks whether certain conditions are satisfied. In addition to understanding the purpose of logical operators, it is important to know how each individual operator behaves when evaluating expressions. The logical AND operator, written as 2 ampersands, is used when we want to check whether two conditions are true at the same time.
Logical operators are special symbols used in programming to combine multiple conditions and evaluate them as a single logical expression. In PHP, as well as in many other programming languages, logical operators help determine whether one or more conditions are true or false before a decision is made. For example, imagine variable A contains the value 0 and variable B contains the value 10. When PHP evaluates these values using a logical operator, it checks whether certain conditions are satisfied. If we use the logical AND operator, PHP verifies whether both conditions are true at the same time. This means that A must meet its condition and B must meet its condition for the result to be considered true. On the other hand, if we use the logical OR operator, PHP checks whether at least one of the conditions is true. This means that if either A meets its condition or B meets its condition, the entire expression becomes true. Logical operators are essential because they allow programmers to build complex decision-making processes. They help a program choose actions intelligently based on several criteria rather than a single comparison. Operators such as AND, OR, and NOT allow the creation of flexible, powerful expressions that guide the flow of a program. Table 4.3 in your material likely lists these operators along with their meanings and examples, showing how they behave when different combinations of true and false values are evaluated. In addition to understanding the purpose of logical operators, it is important to know how each individual operator behaves when evaluating expressions. The logical AND operator, written as 2 ampersands and, is used when we want to check whether two conditions are true at the same time. When PHP evaluates an expression like expression 1 and an expression, the result becomes true only if both expression 1 and expression 2 are true. If either one of them is false or both are false, then the entire result becomes false. This operator is commonly used in situations where multiple requirements must be met before a decision can be made. The logical OR operator, written as 2 vertical bars, works differently. It checks whether at least one of the conditions is true. So in short expression, the final result becomes true if expression 1 is true, or expression 2 is true, or if both are true. The result becomes false only when both expressions are false. This operator is useful when fulfilling even one condition is enough to proceed. Another important operator is the logical XOR operator, which stands for exclusive OR. Unlike the normal OR operator, XOR returns true only when exactly one of the two expressions is true, but not both. This means if one expression is true and the other is false, XOR gives a true result. However, if both expressions are either true or both false, the result becomes false. Finally, the logical NOT operator, written as an exclamation mark, reverses the truth value of a single condition. When PHP evaluates expression, it returns true only when the original expression is false, and it returns false when the original expression is true. This operator is very helpful when we want to check for the opposite of a given condition. Together, these logical operators allow programmers to create powerful decision structures that control how a program behaves, making their code more flexible, accurate, and logical. In this part of the topic, the book is showing how logical operators actually work inside a PHP program by using a small example. At the top of the code, 2 variables are created. A is given the value 0 and B is given the value 10. In PHP, when numbers are used inside an if condition, They are automatically converted to Boolean values. 0 is treated as false, and any non-zero number is treated as true. After defining the variables, the program tests them using the logical AND operator in two slightly different forms. The first if statement uses the symbol version of AND if, A and B. PHP now checks both sides of the AND operator. It looks at A, and because A is 0, it treats A as false. It also looks at B. Since B is 10, it is treated as true. For the logical AND operator to return true, both sides must be true at the same time. Here, the left side is false and the right side is true. So the whole expression A and B becomes false. Because the condition is false, PHP skips the echo statement inside the if block that says test 1. Both A and B are true, and instead executes the else block, imprinting the message test 1. Either A or B is false to the browser. Immediately after that, the program repeats the test using a second if statement. If and no and bidon. In PHP, the keyword and is another way of writing the logical and operator. In other words, it serves the same logical purpose as min. Again, PHP evaluates A as false and B as true, so the combined expression hote and B also becomes false. As a result, the if part is skipped and the else part runs, outputting test 2. Either A or B is false. When you run this script, you will therefore see two lines in the output, both saying that either A or B is false, which clearly demonstrates how the AND operator behaves when at least one of the conditions is false. This example also quietly shows that AND 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 are both logical AND operators in PHP. They give the same result when used inside an if statement like this. In more advanced code, they differ in precedence, and is evaluated before assignment while and is evaluated after. But for a simple condition enclosed in parentheses, as shown here, they behave identically. Overall, this code snippet connects the theory of logical operators with practical execution. It turns abstract truth values into real program output. So you can see exactly what happens when PHP evaluates true and false conditions. Now the program moves on to demonstrate the logical OR operator in two forms. Remember that earlier in the script, the variables were set as A, 0, and B, 10. In PHP, when these values are used inside an if condition, A, 0 is treated as false, and B, 10 is treated as true. The first new condition is written as if A, she, B. Here is the symbol for the logical OR operator. When PHP evaluates this expression, it checks each side separately. The left side, hey, is false. The right side, B, is true. The rule for logical OR is that the entire expression is true if at least one side is true. It does not require both to be true, only one is enough. Because B is true, the combined condition, B becomes true overall, even though A is false. Since the condition is true, PHP executes the statements inside the if block and prints. Test 3, either A or B is true. The else part, which would print test 3, both A and B are false, is completely skipped because the condition did not evaluate to false. Immediately after this, the program repeats the same logical idea, but using the word form of the operator, if A or B done. In PHP, the keyword, or is another way of writing logical OR just like shakumos. Once again, PHP checks might false and B true. Because at least one of them is true, the result of A or BR is also true. So just like in test 3, the if part runs and the program outputs. Test 4, either A or B is true, the else block, which would say test 4. Both A and B are false, does not execute. This pair of tests clearly shows how the OR operator works. As long as at least one condition is true, the whole condition is considered true. It also shows that im and or are both logical OR operators in PHP, and inside a simple if statement like this, they behave in exactly the same way. In more complex expressions, they have different precedents, binds more tightly than or. But in this example, where each condition is simply enclosed in parentheses and used directly in if, they both lead to the same result. Together with the earlier and examples, these snippets help you see the contrast. and requires both conditions to be true, while OR only needs one condition to be true, which is why the AND tests fell into the else branch, and the OR tests fall into the if branch for the same values of AA and beta. In the next part of the program, the author changes the values of the variables to show how single values themselves are treated as conditions in PHP. Now, at Hoi is assigned the value 10 and Bilas is assigned the value 0. No logical operator is used here. Instead, each if statement simply tests one variable on its own. If soy, and later if by. When PHP evaluates an if condition, it always converts the given expression into a Boolean value, meaning it decides whether the expression is considered true or false. In this conversion, any non-zero number, positive or negative, is treated as true, while the number 0 is treated as false. With that rule in mind, look at the first condition, if AI. Because A holds the value 10, which is non-zero, PHP treats A as true. That makes the condition true, so the code inside the if block runs and the program prints. Test 5, A is true. The else part, which would have printed test 5, A is false, is skipped completely because the condition did not evaluate to false. This simple test demonstrates that OA behaves like a true value when used inside a conditional statement. The second if statement does the same thing with B if B die. Here B contains 0, and as mentioned, 0 is treated as false in PHP. When the interpreter checks this condition, it decides that B is false, so the if block is not executed. Instead, control jumps directly to the else block, and the message test 6 B is false is displayed. This pair of tests is very important conceptually because it explains what was happening in all the earlier logical examples. Each time A or B appeared in a logical expression like A and an B or A much and B, PHP first converted those numeric values into Boolean values using exactly this rule. Understanding that non-zero values are treated as true and 0 is treated as false helps you predict the result of more complex logical expressions and write clearer, more reliable conditions in your PHP programs. In the final part of this program, the book introduces the logical NOT operator, written as an exclamation mark, and applies it to the same variables OA and B that you saw in the previous tests. Recall that ADOI currently holds the value 10 and OBDOI holds the value 0. As we discussed earlier, when PHP uses these values in a condition, LA is treated as true because it is non-zero, and BERS is treated as false because it is 0. The logical NOT operator reverses, or negates, the truth value of whatever expression it is attached to. So DIA means not LA and B means not B. In the first if statement, the code is if A. PHP first converts A to a Boolean value, true. Then the NOT operator flips that value, turning it into false. So the overall condition, AA is false. Because the condition is false, the interpreter skips the if block that would print test 7, A is true, and instead executes the else block, printing test 7, A is false. This might sound a bit strange at first, because earlier we saw that A itself is true. But the important point is that the condition here is not A, which means true if AA is false, and false if AA is true. Since AI is true, AO becomes false, and the message correctly says that the negated condition is false. The second if statement applies the same idea to B, if, to be dollars. As before, PHP first looks at B and recognizes that, because it is 0, B on its own is false. The NOT operator then reverses this value, so B becomes true. That means the condition passes, and the if block runs, printing the message test 8, B is true. The else part, which would have printed test 8, B is false, is skipped. Notice what has happened here. Although B itself is false, the expression is true because not always flips the truth value. Taken together, test 7 and test 8 clearly demonstrate how the logical NOT operator works. It simply inverts the truth of any condition. If a condition would normally evaluate to true, adding in front of it makes it false, and if it would normally evaluate to false, makes it true. This is very useful when you want to check that something is not happening, or some condition is not met. For example, if log it in, to run code only when the user is not logged in. With this final example, the program has walked through and, or, and not, and shown not only how PHP decides whether each condition is true or false, but also how these logical operators control which parts of your script actually execute. Figure 4.13 shows the actual output produced when Code Snippet 13 is executed, and it nicely confirms everything you have learned about logical operators and truth values in PHP. First, remember the basic rule. When a number is used as a condition, any value other than 0 is treated as true and 0 is treated as false. This rule applies to both variables, a and b. In the first part of the program, mi was 0 and b was 10. When the AND operator was used, a and b, PHP needed both conditions to be true at the same time. Because a was 0, false, and b was 10, true, the combined condition became false, and therefore test 1 and test 2 both printed either a or b is false. This matches the output in the figure and shows that AND fails as soon as even one side is false. Next, the OR operator was tested with the same values. For OR, the rule is softer. If any one of the conditions is true, the whole expression is considered true. In the checks, a darwi soit b and a or b, a was still false, but b was true, so the overall result became true. That is why test 3 and test 4 both printed either a or b is true in the output. After this, the program changed the values to a dubmabruk 10 and b bevorbub 0 to show how individual variables behave as conditions. When if a dos was evaluated, a was non-zero and therefore true, so test 5 printed a is true. In contrast, if bidius evaluated b as 0, which is false, so test 6 printed b is false. Finally, the not operator was applied, for if anyth. PHP first saw that all was true and then flipped it to false. So the else branch ran and test 7 printed a is false. For if b was false and not turned it into true. So test 8 printed b is true. Altogether, the outputs from test 1 to test 8 form a complete story. Use C and returning true only when both values are true, returning true when at least one value is true. Simple variables turning into true or false based on whether they are 0, and not reversing those truth values. This figure therefore ties the theory and the code together, proving how logical operators control the flow of a PHP program in a clear and predictable way. Assignment operators are used whenever you want to store or update a value in a variable. In PHP, the basic assignment operator is the single equal sign, spoken as equals. It does not mean is equal to in the mathematical sense. Instead, it means take the value on the right side and copy it into the variable on the left side. For example, in the statement C forwards a plus b, PHP first evaluates the expression a plus b, then stores that result inside the variable C. After this statement runs, C will hold the sum of a and b, while the original values of a and b remain unchanged. This right-to-left flow, expression on the right, result stored on the left, is the essential behavior of every assignment operator. Besides this simple can operator, PHP also provides combined assignment operators, which save you from writing the variable name twice when you want to modify it using arithmetic, strings, or arrays. For example, plus course, read as plus equals, adds a value to a variable and immediately stores the new result back into the same variable. So if x is 5, the statement x plus source 3 is a compact way of writing x source x plus 3. After it runs, x becomes 8. Similarly, in a minus equals, performs subtraction and assignment in one step. So x, a 2, is the same as x at x, 2. PHP has equivalent forms for multiplication, division, is and remainder, fatitos. Combined assignment operators are not limited to numbers. With strings, the UAX operator appends new text to the end of an existing string. For example, name. Khan adds a last name onto an existing first name. And with arrays, operators like plus quachinks can be used to perform an array union while storing the result back into the left-hand array. In all these cases, the pattern is the same. The operator carries out some operation using the current value of the variable and another value on the right. then immediately assigns the result back into that same variable, making your code shorter, cleaner, and easier to read. This part of the topic explains how PHP's combined assignment operators act as shorthand for longer arithmetic or string expressions. Each operator modifies the current value of a variable and then immediately stores the new value back into that same variable. When you see the expression a plus moristra b, you should read it as add b to AA and put the result back into A. Internally, PHP treats a plus srax be exactly the same as the longer form a cos srax a plus e cos. The original value of LA is taken, b is added to it, and the sum replaces the old value inside A. In the same way, erin tele b is shorthand for dam sabente b. It subtracts b dol from dre and stores the difference back into A. This is useful, for example, when decreasing a balance, reducing stock, or counting down in a loop. The operator a by b means multiply doi by b and assign the product to avo, which is equivalent to a by j by b. This is commonly used when scaling values, such as increasing a price by a factor or calculating compound amounts. Similarly, a to b stands for a to b to b. It divides o by b and stores the quotient, the result of the division, back into OA. The related operator, a% o b represents o, a% o b. It divides hoi by bidor but keeps only the remainder of that division. This remainder operation is very important in tasks such as checking whether a number is even or odd, or wrapping values around a fixed range, like cycling through days of the week. Finally, the operator a b works with strings rather than numbers. It means append by to the end of delay and store the new combined string back in delostion. Written out in full, it is a day b, where the dot is PHP's string concatenation operator. For example, if A contains hello and B contains world, then after A contains B, the variable AA will hold hello world. In all of these cases, the pattern is the same. The shorthand operator performs an operation between the current value of A and B, and then reassigns the result to both A. This makes your code shorter, clearer, and less error-prone because you don't have to repeat the variable name on both sides of the assignment. Thank you for watching Huzaifa TV officials. Stay informed. Stay inspired. Stay connected with the Huzafa TV official family. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe to never miss an update. Your support keeps this channel growing and inspires more great content. See you in the next video.